Hello, Bill.
Good afternoon, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
So I see you're in your hotel room.
Yes, yes, yes.
You were on CNN last night. You did the late shift with Don Lemon. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm guessing this hadn't broken before you were planning to go on, but this kerfuffle over what Donald Trump said to a widow of a fallen soldier was breaking last night, and that was a topic of conversation for you. I'm watching on Twitter last night, everyone being very mortified that Trump would do this, that say he knew what he signed up for to this widow.
Yeah.
You, Matt, being a brave and reckless
Stupid.
sort,
Reckless, risky. Yeah.
You made the case that maybe, just maybe, this was delivered in a way that was not offensive to the ear.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm sure everyone knows. I think it was four Green Berets who were ambushed and killed in Niger a couple weeks ago. Donald Trump didn't write the widows, the parents, didn't call anybody. There was an uproar this week that why hasn't he done this? And so he finally did, and it did not go well. And I think the as far as I could tell, the commentariat was unanimous in saying that, like, how could Donald Trump say this? He's so callous. And but when I read the story, now maybe there's more. I'm sure there's more to it. We don't know the context. We don't have a transcript of what was said. But if you actually just literally read the words that he's accused of having said, I think they were open to interpretation. Most people took it to be, I think most people took it to be Donald Trump saying to this widow, like, well, your husband's dead, but he knew what he was getting in. He knew what he was signing up for, which obviously is very inhumane and not very compassionate. I think I was maybe the only person I saw who kind of took the contrarian position, which is, if again, I'm perfectly willing to believe that Donald Trump is not terribly compassionate and did not handle this well. That's perfectly plausible. But if all we know is what is literally being reported, the quote, that there's a way that's a flippant and sort of inhumane thing to say, but there's also a way that maybe the context could be, I think, acceptable. So if you say to somebody, like, and certainly when they're deployed, they know going in that there's a chance they may not come back. So I think it's actually a brave and heroic thing for somebody to join the military, certainly to join the Green Berets, which an elite fighting force, and then to be deployed. Trump was in a way stating a fact. And I think that the question of whether or not it was, crude or inappropriate is very much contingent on the context, on the words that surrounded those things, maybe even on the inflection of his voice, things like that, things that are very nuanced. So I went on and I made this point, and and there were people sighing, incredulous that I would say this, like, while I'm saying it and after. And then, of course, the Twitter community erupted and and basically attacked me. And I think at the end of the day, Bill, part of it is that people just aren't giving Trump the benefit of the doubt, which I completely understand. Mm-hmm. Trump does and says a lot of horrible things. I'm not a big Trump fan. And if you could just assume the worst of him, you could just assume that, like, yeah, he does all these other stupid things. He probably said something stupid here. But, like, if that's the case, then why am I even going on and talking about it, right? So, like, if I'm going to assume that every time he's accused of something that he's guilty, that he's wrong, then why do the segment? You know what I mean? Like, isn't intellectual honesty sort of weighing each of these cases independently and judging them that way?
Well, let's just stipulate. I don't want to be disrespectful to you or your profession as a television pundit. But it's inherently crazy that there's a roundtable discussion about what was said in a private setting when there's only there's a scrap of information. There's a secondhand account that just broke, and obviously you're probably getting a recording of the incident, but maybe you want to have a little bit more reporting before you ask a pundit roundtable to weigh in on like what exactly was said and what the general tenor of the conversation was. So everyone's really flying blind here at the point where you guys came into it. But there already is a knee-jerk reaction on social media. Here you are, Matt Lewis. Your existence on TV is a conservative who's not a Trump lackey. They have other Trump lackeys. There are people who play that role on CNN. Like, that's their job. That's not your job. Your job, you're the reasonable conservative. So why people would give you a condescending reaction as if you are a Trump lackey, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Well, it's interesting. I think there's a couple things that have happened. I think one is there is an assumption that Trump is an evil, horrible person, and you have to. There's the resistance, and if there's a resistance doesn't say, and let's take this to the insane Trump is Hitler sort of analogy, right? Like, you don't say, well, Hitler had a point on this thing. You know what I mean? Like, if there's a resistance, if you are up against an existential evil threat, you don't make any concessions.
Right.
You don't say, well, maybe he didn't really mean that. You know what I mean? And so I don't buy into that argument. I feel like my job as a commentator is to be as fair as I can be, intellectually honest, and to sort of judge each of these instances of stories. I mean, certainly you do factor in, you try to learn from history and you factor in experience, but you judge each of these sort of on their own merit. Right. And I think there's a sense that we should just write off Trump, and that if you don't, that somehow you are, an appeaser or an enabler of Trump. The other weird thing that I think has happened is that because I was so, anti-Trump and anti-Trumpism from the beginning, I did accumulate a little bit of this fan base of people who weren't really fans of like Burkean conservatism, the thoughtful conservative center-right commentary. They just didn't like Trump. And since 80% of what I was doing was criticizing Trump, just because that's how the news cycle was playing out, they sort of thought maybe they thought I was a liberal, or I don't know what it was, but like now they're like, why is this guy in my timeline, saying these things?
Well,
so anyway,
but it's not out of bounds for you just to say, look, this is new information. I get how this looks. Maybe there's another way to look at this. I mean, you were not even saying. I mean, you can watch the videotape, but it's on your Twitter feed. It's not like you were adamantly saying, there's no way Trump could possibly be so mean. Trump is the embodiment of the American spirit, and surely he was comforting. You were just saying, hey, wait a second. It's possible, the possibility exists that this might be being reported without full context. Let's take a breather.
But there's this weird, gaslighting that happens. Where, this happens to me a lot. And I think this is just a sign of how my worldview, I'm usually debating, which is to say that I'll be saying something that in my mind sounds perfectly reasonable, liberal, in the sense that it's open-minded and maybe, whatever, hopefully thought-provoking, hopefully interesting, not this is my team, this is your team, thought-provoking, interesting, whatever. And I'll be saying things, and what I'm hearing myself, I'm trying to be very careful and use caveats and not be stupid. But the reactions from other people are gasping and sighing and pearl clutching, and it makes me think maybe I did. Maybe I said something wrong. Like, maybe I accidentally said, I didn't say what I meant to say. And then I go home and I watch the video and I'm like, no, it's exactly what I thought I said.
Well, I mean, I would think that from everything that I've read about this incident, chances are Trump was trying to say something that he thought was comforting. I doubt he was getting into an argument with the widow. Hey, what are you crying about? This is all good. He knew he signed up for. What's the big deal? I doubt he was doing that. I think it's reasonable to assume he did not do it in a terribly comforting way. Right. He's not known for having a soft touch. And whether the widow herself or the congresswoman who was next to her heard this and were incredulous that was what was coming out of his mouth. Trump is never going to be America's comforter in chief, and there's this big pressure on him you should be calling more family members of fallen soldiers. Maybe it's not what we want Trump to be doing. Maybe that's not the role he should be playing here, even if it would be the respectful thing to do. That's not a strong suit.
Well, and I think part of it is the reaction to this, and maybe this is my perception, but the reaction to this has not been what you said, which I think is plausible and probably likely the scenario. It's actually been, I think the assumption has been that this was like nefarious, that Trump was trying to be like rude and mean. I think it's, again, we don't know, but I think it's much more likely that this was clumsy, that sort of he misspoke. Not good, certainly not good. God knows not good. But maybe, I feel like we should have a little grace toward people who are trying to do the right thing and then say something stupid. Well, and I'm not seeing much grace extended to him here.
I know that if I was president, I would be terrible at that aspect of the job. In fact, I'm sure it's like, I'm interested in politics, why doesn't that guy run for office? I'm sure the back of my mind is, man, I do not want to go to funerals. I do not want to call grieving widows and widowers. That is like the last thing I want to do on a given day. And if I was in that position and they started, President Scher, you just gotta do it. This is the job. You do this now, and you put on a face and you do it properly. And I'm like, oh, fine. That's the kind of guy I'd be. I'm sure. I bet Trump is exactly like that. This is the last thing he wants to do. I'd rather be golfing. I don't want to be talking to widows. But for a lot of us, that is the job. You are supposed to be a comforter in times of trauma, and it is something he is. I mean, actively bad. I mean, something like Vegas or Charlottesville actively does the opposite of what you want a president to do in that situation. So I think this comes up a lot because there are people who do not want him to remain in that job, to say, man, look how bad this guy is in that job.
And I think you've just hit on something, that there are ulterior motives, and that some of the criticism of Trump is commentary. Mm-hmm. He's supposed to be comforting a widow. He obviously did not comfort a widow. This is obviously bad. Right? Then there's scoring points. There's, I don't like Trump. I don't want him to be president. Therefore, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to attack him. And I think that the latter may be more of the commentary than the former.
As I've already exposed my inherent self-centeredness, I'm going to shift
gears. By the way,
this
show should just be me going on TV, getting yelled at, and then coming here to explain what I meant.
Well, I mean, every pundit should have a podcast like that.
Let me just say, and sorry to interrupt you, but last week we did this where I talked about my comments about Harvey Weinstein, and I got several emails from DMZ listeners and viewers that were incredibly thoughtful, in some cases disagreeing with my take, but being very, I would say, compassionate, explaining to me why I was wrong, or I should read this book, I should think about this. Others who agreed with me. But either way, I have to tell you, in a business where some of the things that we encounter are demoralizing, clickbait, that kind of stuff, how refreshing and sort of soul nourishing it is to hear from people who listen to what we do and are smart and thoughtful, and it's a constructive process. So thank you for what you guys do.
DMZ fans, the best fans.
They probably are.
So I have a piece over at Politico today called "The Urge to Purge," which is critical of both Steve Bannon's war on the Republican establishment. His claims are going to recruit about 15 challengers to Senate incumbents. And what we're seeing on the left, we just saw, in particular, Democracy for America and Daily Kos actively, publicly recruit Kevin De Leon, who's the state Senate president of California, jump into the race against incumbent Democrat Senator Dan Feinstein. And technically speaking, it's not quite a traditional primary. They have the top two system. So there's a preliminary contest, and whoever is the top two finishers, regardless of party, move on to the general. So there's some
jungle primary.
So there's some thought that Feinstein and De Leon may end up being in the general election against each other. But as I mentioned, I might have talked about this on the show here before for hardcore DMZ fans. FDR tried this in 1938. There's a whole book on it called Roosevelt's Purge by Susan Dunn. But it's also talked about in Into the Storm, which is a Kenneth Davis biography of FDR's second term, touched upon in The Lion and the Fox by James McGregor Burns, another Roosevelt historian. So it's 1938. He won a record-breaking landslide for the time, over 60% of the popular vote in 1936. He gets a big head. He thinks he can do whatever he wants because the public's with him, so he tries to pack the Supreme Court. That's a big disaster. His relationships with the conservative faction of his party are worsening. The New Deal reforms he wants are kind of stalling out. And so he makes he does a fireside chat. He makes a national radio broadcast where he throws down the gauntlet and says, as we enter into primaries, this is a time when, direct election of nominees by primary is kind of a new thing. He encouraged people, regardless of what party they're in, to nominate people with a, quote, liberal school of thought. And he goes on to define what he means by liberal, what he means by conservative. I think it's one of the first times that those terms were actually defined. And then he goes on to say, as a member of the Democratic Party, I reserve the right to, weigh in when I think my name is being used inappropriately. And then that's in the June of that year. In August, he goes to Georgia. There's an event in Georgia where he's giving a speech. The incumbent senator is in the audience. One of the primary challengers is in the audience. And FDR explicitly criticizes the incumbent senator, calling him my friend, but not having a, quote, liberal school of thought. And if I could vote, I most assuredly would have voted for his opponent. And it says the guy's name. It's right in his face. And the incumbent senator is Walter George. Stands up from his chair, goes over to FDR. FDR extends his hand first. Senator George from then shakes his hand and says, "I regret that you have called into question my democracy, but I accept the challenge." He was a very formal Southern gentleman type. And then FDR goes on. He takes a train to South Carolina, takes a swipe at the senator there, does a press conference where he talks about Maryland senator. He quotes an editorial but says, "You may make this my statement that he is trying to run on both the Roosevelt name and with the money from conservative Republicans." And after all this, he loses most of these, all those three races I mentioned. He lost them all. The conservatives in those races won big margins. There's one other guy in the House that he targeted that did lose. That was it. And there's other liberals that he backed who lost, most notably Congressman Maury Maverick, liberal from Texas, which is where the word maverick entered our political vocabularies from him.
Really?
Yeah. So
what about the TV show Maverick, the James Garner show?
There might be a connection there. I don't know. But it was this huge political humiliation, and it drove the conservative Democrats closer to the Republican Party. And there's one political scientist that said that the conservative coalition of Congress, the bipartisan coalition, held power for the next 20 years. So it was a bad call for FDR to do that. Now, you may say that's just one example. You can point to certain things like, and look, Roy Moore may well become in the Senate now, even though he purged Luther Strange. Dave Bratt took out Eric Cantor. There's a Congressman, Donna Edwards, no longer in the House, but she took out a corporate-friendly Democrat, Albert Wynn, back in 2008. So there are examples like that. But there are also examples like Joe Miller, who beat Lisa Murkowski in a primary back in 2010. Murkowski gets the last laugh, wins a write-in campaign. Now she is not just in the Senate, but untethered to the far right in Alaska, which doesn't have an immediate consequence, but 7 years later, she plays a singular role in denying Obamacare repeal, knowing I can do this and you guys can't touch me because you tried to take me out before and you failed.
When you come at the king,
right? Well, that's right. And so on the Democratic side, people, I was one of them. I did stuff to help Joe Lieberman lose that Democratic primary in 2006. I mean, I wasn't on the ground, but I did stuff on my blog. I actually called out a ad that Lieberman ran that had a fake bumper sticker of Ned Lamont. Lamont was the anti-war primary challenger back then, and the ad was like, all Lamont has to say is "No more Joe," and it has that bumper sticker that says "No more Joe" on it, which was not a slogan of Lamont's. It had a URL on the bumper sticker, which I looked up and saw that there was not a real website there. I think it actually was an anti-Joe Arpaio website from the sheriff of Arizona. And so I called this out, saying this is a fake bumper sticker and making a false stack on Ned Lamont. So it's not like I wasn't down at the time. But I can say in retrospect, yes, Lamont beat Lieberman in the primary. Lieberman wins the general election on his made-up Connecticut for Lieberman line. And guess what? He becomes more untethered to the liberal progressive base of the party.
What was the line? You said on the what line?
Connecticut for Lieberman. Now he created a party called Connecticut for Lieberman. So this is 2006. Fast forward to 2009, where people are trying to get a public option in Obamacare. As that effort was stalling out, the last-ditch effort was, well, let's do a Medicare buy-in for people 55 and over. That at least is a start towards a public option, which a number of Democrats have been in favor of in the past, including Lieberman. Suddenly, Lieberman says, I'm not for that anymore. And I'm your 60th vote, and you can't stop me. So there was a direct connection between the primary challenge failing and losing a policy battle later on. But Democrats, the progressives in the party, don't learn a lesson from that. They still say, well, thank God we got him out of the party. He's not besmirching our party anymore. Let's try to take out Blanche Lincoln in Arkansas in 2010. Let's not accept Arlen Specter's party switch to the Democratic Party, even though he might be our best shot for keeping the seat, even though he gave Obama the 60th vote on the stimulus and on Dodd-Frank and on Obamacare. Who cares? Your 30-year record is terrible. Get the hell out of here. We want Joe Sestak. Joe Sestak loses in the general to Pat Toomey. Lincoln loses in the general, even though she just barely won the primary in 2010. So she's wounded. She loses in the general to, I think it was Boozman in Arkansas.
Bozeman.
Bozeman, sorry.
It just looks like Boozman.
And so these things keep not working, but yet here we are again. Feinstein is someone who, she said a couple things this year. She had a Q&A in August where she was asked about Trump's response to the hurricane in Texas, and she said it's only been a few months. You got to give him a chance. You got to be patient. And then she said another comment about how if he changes, he could still be a good president. These are things you're talking about your own nuance. If you're not full resistance all the time, that's an offensive thing to say. She's not saying, I predict Trump's going to be a good president, or I really think he's doing a good job with those hurricanes right now. She's just giving him a little bit of space. Her voting record is anti-Trump. She hasn't broken ranks on a major thing in recent years. I mean, you could point to certain votes in the past that I think she might have voted for one of the Bush tax cuts. I think she voted for the Iraq War, so those things you might not like about her. But as far as the here and now, she's not breaking rank. Yet, people here's a chance to oust her and get a more true blue progressive in there. And really, maybe it works. Maybe the guy wins. I can't predict that. But the evidence over history is very few incumbents actually get purged. And if you don't do the successful purge, there are significant consequences to losing, the loss of a seat or a less cooperative person in your party.
This is like a microcosm of international relations. Interventionism.
Well,
right?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean,
the unintended consequences.
Any kind of intervention, any plan, ceases to be once you hit the ground. There's always going to be.
We will be greeted as liberators as we take down Dianne Feinstein.
Right. There's things you can't control, and in certain war situations, you feel I have no choice. I've tried these other 50 things diplomatically, and I got no other choice. I have to take this high risk strategy of an invasion. But in this case, Dianne Feinstein is 84 years old. She's literally the oldest person in the Senate. Maybe she'll make it to 90. There are a couple of examples of senators who have gone beyond that. But chances are she's not going to serve out that term. Just wait a few years. She is from a different generation. Most likely in California, that next senator will be more liberal. Just chill out and let it happen.
Yeah, and it's actually years ago there was pressure on Supreme Court justices to retire while Obama was still president.
What? That's different. I think that's
a different thing, right? That's a very different.
I mean, if you don't retire now, you may not get the chance to replace that seat, which was the correct argument that Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Stephen Breyer did not adhere to. But in this case, California is a safe seat. Is a very blue seat. I mean, obviously, weird things can occur, but good odds that the next senator in that seat is going to be liberal. So why the rush? Well, the rush is people are trying to exert their influence and show it is dangerous to cross these progressive lines.
I also saw some stuff that could be considered ageist. I don't remember who, but I saw something on Twitter or Facebook from some people on the left saying, if you have to be 35 before you can be elected president, there's going to be an age limit. You have to be a certain age. Maybe we should have age limits on the other end.
Well, people only say that when the person involved is someone you don't like. No one's saying that about Pat Leahy because he doesn't vote on things that liberals disagree with. So people are sort of grasping for random arguments. One example. I've made the point. Others have made the point. You're now asking progressives. This is not. Excuse me for jumping from one thought to another. I am not opposed to naked ambition. I get Kevin DeLeon, he's a state senator, he's term limited. It's not easy for him to run for something else. The governor's race is pretty full with Gavin Newsom, the lieutenant governor, running, and some other big names running. You're not going to go running for a state assembly after state senate, probably. I think he's LA. Maybe it's not a good mayoral position he wants to do. This is kind of the next step up for him, and someone's in his way. So I totally get him as an individual saying, this is what's right for my career. I am not a disrespectful. I mean, like any other profession, ambition is a personally healthy thing. You want to advance in your profession. I get that. But there are national progressive groups, specifically Democracy for America and Daily Kos. I'm guessing Move On would jump in. Daily Kos, Democracy for America, and Move On, they were involved in the Lamont-Lieberman race. They were involved in Halter-Lincoln in Arkansas, and they were involved in Sestak-Specter. So I think it's likely Move On jumps into this, but I haven't seen it. They are saying, we want to use, and they told DeLeon this publicly, our national network of donors and activists, we want to use on your behalf to take on this race. And they can do whatever they want with their networks, it's theirs, but they're making a strategic choice that this is an important priority for us, which means there's a certain time and space that's not going to go towards vulnerable Republicans we want to beat to take the Senate and the House. And they might say, look, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And I'm sure that, I'm not saying they're going to do nothing on those fronts, but California is not a tiny state. That's a pretty big operation to take on. And, everything involving the 2018 map for Democrats is really tough. So
the good news for you, of course, is that the mirror image of this is happening on the Republican side.
Well, that's right. This is why. Bannon is crazy town. The map is in their favor. Let's go after all these safe Republicans who have none of them who have taken negative votes against Trump. Yeah. The people who sunk Obamacare, Murkowski, Collins, and McCain, they're not the ones that we're talking about here.
Right.
He's going after diehard Republicans, John Barrasso in Wyoming, the worst you'd say...
Or in Hatch.
Jeff Flake obviously has been a little curmudgeonly towards Trump, but his voting record's not. He's just rhetorically unhelpful.
Or if you want to go after Flake, and I would, obviously it's not my cup of tea, but if you want to do it, the onus is on you to get a Republican, a John Shadegg, someone who could win a Republican, not Kelly Ward. You need someone who could win the primary and then win the general election.
Well, and Steve Bannon was on Sean Hannity. He announced this war on Sean Hannity, and Sean Hannity was started to bring up the Christine O'Donnell example. So Christine O'Donnell, you may recall, this was 2010. This was the seat this was Joe Biden's seat that had an interim senator and a Democrat, but the House Republican from Delaware, which is only one, it's an at-large seat, was Mike Castle, a moderate Republican. He was former governor, former current House member, so he had won statewide before. He was seen as favored for the seat. And Christine O'Donnell shows up, knocks him out in a low turnout primary, proceeds to be exposed as a former pagan who dabbled in witchcraft. And she has to cut an ad.
Who among us?
Right. And she has to cut an ad saying, "I'm not a witch, I'm you." She's a laughing stock. She gets crushed. So so Hannity, brings us up on his own, suggesting people are going to say what you're doing is like that. And Hannity starts saying that he kind of liked Christine O'Donnell, and then Bannon kind of cuts him off and says, "Look, this is not going to be like 2010. The Tea Party was in its infancy. Candidates weren't properly vetted. We're going to recruit people who have strong records, with government experience. This is going to be a field that you can respect." And then the next day, it's Kelly Ward from Arizona, who folks don't know, had, as a state legislature, had a public hearing on the chemtrail conspiracy, which, she insists, I'm not saying I believe in the chemtrail conspiracy. My constituents were concerned about chemtrails and I held a hearing on it. That's the kind of person you're dealing with here. This is a classic Christine O'Donnell type.
I don't know. She's in the Christine O'Donnell, Sharon Angle camp. I don't know if you saw, she had two staffers who used to work for Breitbart who have quit her campaign publicly today, and saying that she is, she's not the real deal. She's going to be a swamp creature or whatever.
Now maybe that's an anomaly, and other Bannon recruits are going to be better. So I can't fully prejudge, but he's still embarking on a party-wide purge when the people in the party are already scared to death of crossing Trump voters. It's not like people are going rogue left and right. Bob Corker, I'm not going to run for re-election, and then I will insult you. John McCain, I'm going to die soon, so I will sink Obamacare. It's not like these are folks who are on the hot seat in 2018. Yet he's doing this anyway. So someone's going to lose this battle. So someone's purge attempt is going to come short, and someone's purge attempt is going to look pretty good. Or maybe they both look badly. I don't know, but it's possible that the Democrats are going to look good in this, and they're going to come to me and saying, "Bill Scher, you didn't believe in us," blah blah blah. But it's because you're both doing a high risk, kind of foolish thing at the same time. So you can't.
Just imagine though, Bill. imagine if imagine a scenario where the left is going after Dianne Feinstein, but the right is husbanding all their resources, all the Mercer money, the Sheldon Adelson money, the Koch money, they're all together instead of fighting each other. They're together going after Heidi Heitkamp and Joe Manchin and Claire McCaskill. That could be a big difference, right?
But we're in a situation where both parties are unsettled. Both parties have divisions. If it wasn't for modern ballot access laws, we'd probably already have 4 or 5 parties that were the result of these tectonic shifts. So you have people on both sides sort of anxious to, folks who want a more democratic, socialist Democratic Party, folks like Bannon want a more economic nationalist Republican Party. They refuse to be patient, even though both of them have momentum. Trump already won the presidential primary. He's already put that stamp on the party. Bernie has already gotten nearly every 2020 contender to sign on to single payer. So part of my point in the article was, it's not that I'm saying you shouldn't try to change parties if that's your interest. It's that the purge part of it is a highly aggressive, high-risk way to go about doing it, with evidence of it not working in both the recent and the ancient past. You try to win the argument. Win the argument on single payer. Win the argument on trade protectionism. And even people who are currently in positions of power, who, Orrin Hatch may not be a free trader in his heart, but he became more skeptical about TPP as the debates went on, because he was feeling the pressure from below. So that's what you want to be doing.
No, you're right. That's a very good point. There is an assumption that intellectual debate and persuasion is a complete waste of time. And so instead of changing minds, you just have to change members, change politicians.
Well, and also picking your battles. Trump won a primary. People got involved in that primary who wanted to espouse an economic nationalist line for the Republican Party. You had to knock off some big dogs like Jeb Bush to do it. But it's different than going after a sitting senator or a sitting House member who has generally been a reliable vote for your party. It's a much more aggressive act to take. Incumbents have advantages that are tough to overcome, and you come up short, you might feel the negative repercussions of that.
Yes, absolutely. And no, I think you're totally right, and it could just be somebody voting, deciding at the last minute, well, I don't think I'm going to vote for that now,
Well, and Roy Moore might well win. If you're going to purge, doing it in a deep blue or deep red state is your lower risk proposition. You win the primary. Unlikely that a state's going to lurch in the opposite direction because they have a quibble about 1 or 2 things with the candidate. But you're certainly taking somewhat of a larger risk having Roy Moore there.
Well, the problem too is if the goal, and this is a big if, but if the goal is to elect senators who are going to support Trump's reform agenda, who do you trust more to do that? I would argue that Luther Strange is a more reliable Trump vote than Roy Moore.
Well,
if that's your goal, your goal is I need people that if Donald Trump needs a vote, they're going to vote with Donald Trump. All you have to do is pick up the phone and call Luther Strange, and he'll say, okay.
I don't know to what extent Steve Bannon is actually thinking these things through, or just is a guy with political bloodlust who likes to have fights for the sake of having fights, and this is fun for him. So it's hard for me to exactly say. But if I was to presume a high degree of rational thought towards having more over Strange, Strange is a guy who literally got Trump's endorsement, said, I'm going to do whatever Trump wants me to do. Trump's argument was, this guy doesn't even ask anything of me. He just does what I say.
He doesn't even want a picture. He doesn't even want to have dinner with the family.
Right.
Yeah.
So that wasn't really the problem with Luther Strange. I can only presume the thing you can count more on doing, more likely at least than Strange, is not keep the government open, not not raise the debt ceiling. The literal
and vote against Mitch McConnell
for leader. The burn it down things
filibuster,
are things that
filibuster.
I mean, if that's what Bannon really wants, I want a Republican Party that doesn't go along to get along on even the basics, because I want to see the whole thing blow up. You make that decision.
That's fine too, but don't say that you're doing it because we need people who are going to vote with Donald Trump and his reform agenda. Because Luther Strange did exactly that.
Well, you say what you say that's going to work for you. Bannon knows that Trump has the hot hand with the base as it stands. Like, that has not changed a whit in the course of this year. I mean, his case to Alabama voters was, trust me, voting for Roy Moore is what Trump really wants deep down in his heart.
In his heart, he knows I'm right.
Right. So he can't make this an anti-Trump thing. I mean, the entire Alabama debate was, I love Trump. No, I love Trump. No, I love Trump the most. That seems to be the extent of the intellectual discussion happening in Republican primary circles right now. So Bannon's going to toe that line as long as it's a useful thing for him to say.
Well, once again, we've solved all the world's problems. This is the highest rated show on the DMZ, on blogging heads.
Is that right? You've seen the numbers?
Ratings are huge. This little Bob Wright and that other show. Don't hold a candle to this. He can't even settle on one person to debate. It's different people every week.
He listens to every show.
I
know. Always good to talk to you, Matt Lewis, here on the DMZ. Where can people find your work?
Daily Beast, also podcast, Matt Lewis and the News, and follow us here on Twitter at DMZ Show. And
check out my latest work at Politico and the podcast. This is Not Normal at liberaloasis.com. Available on iTunes and Stitcher and all those other fine podcast places. And I'll talk to you, Matt, next week.
All right. See you, Bill. Thanks, guys.